Oh, welcome back to the stage. We've got Ruth and we've got David, who are two of the authors of a new book on housing adaptations. So I'll hand over to yourselves, Ruth and David, to take us through your new book on key skills for housing adaptations.
Thank you, Paul. And just thank you to Foundations for inviting us to kind of give a little bit of a background to the book and what we're aiming to do with it. Start with kind of a bit more background to ourselves. I've been working in the area of housing and social care for about 20 years. I've just recently left a job working in children's social care with children with disabilities, and I've just started a new role with the NHS. So it's kind of a bit of a transition period for me. But I'm kind of passionate about supporting people to understand the processes of creating a good environment for people to live in. So that's me, and over to David.
My name's David. I'm currently working as a senior housing OT at South Gloucestershire Council, and I've been practicing in the area of adult social care and housing probably for about the last 10 years or so. Very much like Ruth, really. I'm passionate about making sure that actually the work that I do actually has a positive impact on individuals and also the colleagues that I work with. So it's trying to reframe that, thinking about environmental modifications as a means to support people to be as independent as they can be or as they wish to be, but also kind of thinking about actually it's making your home a place where you could do whatever you need to do.
And then we didn't do this just the two of us. There'll be a bit more about the collaboration to kind of come up with the book. But actually a key part of the book is Julia Badger. Julia started working in children's social care, and then she moved over to work with adults. She then moved again to the community equipment stores in Lincolnshire, but currently works in a stroke unit in Lincoln. But she co-authored the Essential Guide for Newly Qualified Occupational Therapists with me. But moving on kind of from that, she was really key in the discussions about how the current book on housing adaptations would be presented and what content would be included. And so although she wasn't able to commit to writing, and which is why she's not here today, she really kind of helps with the basis of the book and making sure that it's the book it is today, and hopefully that's the way we want it to be, and of use to people. So how did the book kind of come together? It came out of my head. I was sorting out my CPD. I'd done a number of courses and I had all this information, and I was sitting around kind of bit of spring cleaning probably. And what I did was I kind of laid it all out so it kind of made sense. And from that, I actually developed a course that runs in Lincolnshire to support those new to the area of housing adaptations working in social care. So to me, it made sense to have a book that reflected the course, because obviously not everyone can access courses. The format of the Essential Guide for Newly Qualified Occupational Therapists was very much a collaboration. It was current practitioners providing up-to-date information on how they worked. So we thought that gave quite an authentic voice. And for a long time, there was this idea of the book, but actually there were aspects of it that I just couldn't work out. And then Jessica Kingsley Publications got in touch with me and said, did I have any ideas? So I said, well, yes, I've got this idea, but I can't see how we can provide some of the information. How do you talk about reading a set of plans when actually they're in the size of an A5 piece of paper? So they actually then were able to tell me that there was online facility. So that meant that the book could go ahead. So it all kind of came together in one go, and I was telling David about it, and he said, well, he was quite keen to be involved, so that set the three of us on the path to creating the book.
Thank you, Ruth. I'm not sure whether I feel like I was an unwitting volunteer. But no, I mean, in terms of what Ruth is talking about, actually, we did feel that there was a need. Well, I felt there was definitely a need for something like this. I mean, there are some other books that have been written on adaptations, but none kind of in the focus that our book has taken. So, in terms of what we wanted, we didn't want our book to be a textbook, first of all. So, what you won't see in there is reams and reams of theory. If the information exists elsewhere, then you would get directed elsewhere to find that information. So we're not regurgitating and we're not rehashing what's already out there. So I mean, it's kind of structured as almost as a how-to guide to the things that you need to consider when you're looking to make environmental changes or when you're adapting a person's home. And what we wanted it to be is that there's lots of information that experienced practitioners have in their heads that isn't written down anywhere.
So in terms of what we were looking at, we wanted this to be able to share kind of the skills and knowledge that practitioners have. We've got all this stuff built up in our heads and it isn't really written down anywhere. So really what we wanted to do was have a book or have a resource that would support new qualified practitioners to develop their skills and actually think about how they consider when they're making environmental changes to somebody's home, and also to reflect on their practice and the approaches that they're taking. But also it was to, hopefully, it would help experienced practitioners to actually sometimes rethink or relearn some of the things that they may have forgotten. And we felt that actually having the book actually reflects what we felt is the OT process. So it's reinforcing the need to work collaboratively with your end user and also everybody who's involved in the delivery of home modifications.
So what we kind of wanted to focus on was a book, as David said, that is different to what is out there. So it's to facilitate learning, and we again, that person-centered practice, and it's contextualized. And many of the books are written by overseas authors. So this one is very much considering UK as a whole, and trying to reflect the differences that there are across the four nations. It is written by current UK-based practitioners. Whilst there is a lot of experience from people who've moved on from that area of practice, we wanted to keep it with people who are practicing in the area of housing currently. And then, as I mentioned previously, there is actually online content, which we'll mention later, but that is a key difference. It expands the amount of information and options that we could provide. And throughout the book, there are practical exercises. So it's enabling people to kind of not only read, but actually to try out and consider. So it's a practical way to expand on knowledge, whilst also kind of generally most people are in the role that they're needing to do. So it's not written in a way that you would read it from front to rear cover. People can go in, pick out a bit. So you might be looking at some of the practical skills and considering those, but also be working with someone where you need to actually consider a very specific area of adaptation. So you can dip in and out, but hopefully progressing and increasing knowledge while you're doing that.
So how did we want the book to look is quite important. As Ruth said, it's not kind of a book that you have to go from chapter 1 all the way through to the end. It's very much something that you can pick up and put down as you need to. But what we wanted, the book kind of covers 3 sections of practice. So it looks at supporting readers to hone and develop their reasoning skills and actually support them to articulate that when they're making their decisions around making physical changes to somebody's home. And also we wanted it also considers, it looks at some of the legislation that's available and kind of some of our duties, but also how we actually engage the individual or the end user in the actual process of making the physical change to their environment. Because if we're not successful in that, then an alteration may not necessarily work how we envisage it to, or it may not be what the client would want, and they may not engage with it. So it's about getting practitioners to think, where do we start and what do we need to do, and then how do we get the individual actually involved in that process. So hopefully by the end of it, they're engaged with it, that they will use what's been installed. We're also looking at, sort of as Ruth said, we're looking at some of those more specific things around. So things, considering, for example, there's a chapter in there about sensitive and difficult conversations. And in that, we sort of talk about rehousing, when to adapt, some of the circumstances, when to adapt and when we shouldn't adapt, or if we are, how much we should do. We're also looking at degenerative conditions, or conditions that change over time. And another example is we're looking at specific things, so things like adaptations for safety, and also, in some of the more personal areas, sort of like kitchen adaptations or toilet and bathroom adaptations. So we wanted to look at those things individually, but also so that you could pull those together. So it's not kind of just lumping everything in with the bathroom, because actually the things you do in a bathroom are very, very different. And so it's kind of helping practitioners reflect on what they're doing with the individual at that particular time.
So looking at the first section, what we did was we looked at the process that we have to go through, those background things that are essential to creating an adaptation. But because this is about people and collaboration and everything, we actually ask people to reading it to actually start the first chapter by reflecting on the meaning of home. It's something that we all have in some way, shape or form, and it's got so much importance to everybody, but all individual in different ways. And so asking people to reflect on that hopefully means that they're going to understand a little bit more about the requests and suggestions that they're discussing with people that they're working to support. And whilst the book is written for occupational therapists in the main, but obviously not just occupational therapists, but any adaptation has so many different people involved in it that actually we have included kind of some descriptions of the different roles of people who are involved in the adaptation process. It's not heavy on the legislation side of things, but it does kind of reflect current legislation and supporting those who work outside of England in understanding the differences with, say, kind of the Disabled Facilities Grant and the process of adaptations in the four nations. It was important to us to illustrate what the OT role should or could be, and to support the understanding of what professional reasoning looks like when it's relating to adaptations. We need to be an evidence-based profession, but sometimes it's difficult to know how you present that evidence, especially as adaptations and housing is actually an area where there needs to be much, much more research. And as David mentioned, there are kind of a couple of chapters on areas that we need to consider, but aren't really something that you tend to reflect on and think about prior to actually finding yourself in the situation. So we're a multicultural society, and some people will be well versed with different cultural considerations, but the book doesn't provide you with answers. It's again part of a kind of reflective journey to get people to think about what they might need to go and research and understand. And also kind of alongside the sensitive conversations is actually to broach those subjects with the people that they're supporting. And then a big part of this section is actually the key skills that's referred to in the title. And this is very much as stepping people through the process of completing an adaptation, what type of things should be included in a recommendation for presenting to either the for the disabled facilities grant or a social care adaptation. So, the assessment process, but also how to measure a room, how to read plans. So we've tried to be very, very practice based in that, but in a way that people can not only read about it, but maybe go away and practice some of those skills.
So in terms of presenting the information, what we wanted to look at was, instead of being sort of condition specific, we wanted the reader to actually think about some of the areas that somebody might experience. For example, so if somebody has vision loss or they have sensory issues, we wanted to not necessarily, it doesn't tell the reader or practitioner how to go about assessing somebody, but these are some of the considerations that you might want to think about when you're looking at making physical changes to the built environment for somebody who, we looked at things like sensory loss, the considerations for making changes for people who are younger, children and young people, those who are sort of larger or plus size, or different, I think we've called it different body shapes, didn't we, Ruth? We're also looking at also those who might have, or those who live with cognitive impairments, and also supporting, making physical alterations for those with reduced mobility. And we also kind of focused some of the, and then we sort of more practical things around access adaptations, for example. Things to think about in terms of when you're trying to facilitate the ability for somebody to leave and enter their home, how they do that, who they do that with, what some of the solutions might be. Another sort of area that we've also looked at, sorry, I'm looking through the book, is around sort of how you enable some of those key day-to-day living tasks. So how does a person function in the bathroom? What do they do in the bathroom? How do we enable some or all of those tasks to be completed? Do we support somebody? Do we remove some of the required, do we talk about how actually those routines are structured? What practical things can we do in the bathroom, for example, to make things safer and easier for somebody? Consideration things around lighting, how the ergonomics of where you place handrails and grab rails, for example, of how somebody might be able to transfer on and off a toilet, for example. So it's, as we say, it's taken a broad approach that is giving you some key things to think about. It's not about giving you the answers. It's about you developing the skills and knowledge to be able to come to those answers, not on your own, but being able to give you the skills and knowledge to be able to reason why you may be doing something or why something you were thinking about isn't the right option.
So what we did was we tried, we thought that not everyone's going to be working with somebody when they're designing an adaptation. There are new builds, there are kind of people who work in housing organisations who will be looking at a broader aspect. So what we did was we actually then focused on the rooms that are generally adapted most frequently. And the idea is to potentially kind of cross-pollinate with the other chapters on the kind of the person specific, but again, give ideas of what can be achieved, what can be changed. Not saying these things have to be changed, but have you considered height adjustable work surfaces in the kitchen or things like that? But also it's very much those, if you've done this, have you also thought about that? So if you change the height of the work surface, is the plug socket still accessible? It's those kind of everyday little bits of information that you would probably pick up from a colleague. And I think that's one of the things that we recognise as well, that often occupational therapists working in housing are working in very, very small teams, if not lone working. So sometimes there isn't someone to turn around and say, I've got this problem, have you got any solutions to it? So this is, again, trying to be just that information gathered from all these really experienced practitioners and putting it out there to support the decision making. However, we have to limit it to something, and most occupational therapists will be working in the home environment. So the book is actually limited to just the person's home and their kind of garden or outside area, because you only have so many pages and so many words and so much time to write. There is so much more that could be written about the wider environment, but unfortunately the book wasn't the place to do that.
So in terms of, for us, what we wanted to kind of reflect was that learning that you do when you're in practice. So there are lots of active learning opportunities. For example, we've got a wide range of online resources. So for example, as Ruth has been talking about, we've got quite an example of a full set of plans for a house, which you can use in the case studies that are embedded throughout the book. And also at the start of each chapter, we ask you to reflect on some questions and think about the things that might be coming up in that chapter, just to test your own knowledge. So, and it gives you an opportunity to reflect on what you know and potentially where the gaps are in your knowledge and where you might need to focus your learning. So it's exactly as Ruth said, is most of us, there isn't really a formal training course for making alterations to the built environment. Most of us in practice have kind of picked up those hints and tips and those shortcuts from our colleagues over a number of years. But this is trying, especially with those who are new to practice or maybe working in isolation, is kind of hopefully going to give them the opportunity to develop some of those skills. And it's not just about sat there and reading it, it's about having that interaction. So hopefully the book is an interactive experience with the online resources that we have and sort of directing you to think about your own knowledge and where the gaps might be and where the book may help plug those, or where you might have to go and often read some more.
And we are realistic. This is just a book. It's not going to tell everybody everything. It's not going to replace learning. It's not going to replace the conversations with your colleagues. There's so much more out there. It's just that, you might have to wait for a course to run or funding for a course. There are plenty of webinars and workshops out there. So it's a case of this is just added into what else is out there, and we just want to give people a bit of a head start and to kind of support those people who, or I mean, even students and those people who think, well, maybe I'd like to go into social care, but actually I'm not too sure I could do that. When I joined social care, I'd never done anything around reading plans, assessing the environment, and in some ways this book kind of is what I would have wanted all those years ago when I took the leap out of the NHS and into social care. I found it quite daunting, and I had some really, really supportive colleagues, and that's how I managed to kind of find my passion in that area. But hopefully we can kind of make that transition into that area of work a little bit easier for people. And so thank you. I'm afraid the formatting for the some of the slides didn't quite work as it should have done when we uploaded them, but those are our contact details, and we'll be happy to provide any kind of additional information or feedback if you get in touch with us. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you both. I'll just have a look. See if anybody's got any comments, please do add them into the chat. And I better show your discount code as well, don't I? So there we go. If anybody wants to buy the book, that's the code you need to use to get the 15% discount. FKSHA 15.
It is valid for 2 weeks from today.
Excellent, excellent. So gives people a timetable as well, a deadline to buy. So I think kind of whenever you write a book or something like that, you always kind of have a favourite chapter or favourite bit in the book that you're kind of really pleased with. So for either of you, perhaps start with Ruth. What's your kind of favourite bit of the book, and which bit are you kind of most proud of?
I think I learned so much. So I've been in children's social care for 19 years, and found myself writing about frailty, and had to go away and do a lot of kind of research and reading about something that I knew very little about. And I wrote that chapter and then passed it on to someone who was working in that area of practice, who I would have asked to write the chapter if I'd known them before. But, it's one of those things where you meet someone, you think, you could be useful. And she came back with a few comments, but actually said it was solid. It had information that she thought was valid. So I was quite proud of that aspect. But I have to say, the writing the sensitive conversations chapter, David, Julia, and I had gone, it's going to be about not sleeping in your own bedroom and thinking about rehousing. But as I wrote it, it became about so much more. You've got to consider death and kind of, well, it was sex, death, family tensions. They all came into it. Yet that wasn't what I set out to write. It's just how the chapter developed. It was an interesting couple of days, that one.
Yeah, because I think it's some of those skills sometimes, particularly around having those perhaps more difficult conversations that are kind of difficult to attain sometimes, and are so important. I think particularly in terms of the complex cases, sometimes having those more challenging conversations.
Yeah, we don't have them that often, so quite often we find ourselves in the situation of having that conversation without knowing that that's where that visit discussion is going to end, because a conversation with someone in their home will follow its own path. You may have gone in with a discussion about bathing, but actually find it's gone on to a completely different topic. So we're not constrained, and we can find ourselves in situations where we're having to have those conversations, but not necessarily with the time to consider what might come up in the conversation. Yeah. I don't know if I'm making sense there.
I know what you mean. And David, what's your favourite bit of the book?
Oh, my favourite bit of the book. I think for me, one of the chapters that I wrote was actually what is a home adaptation, and sometimes for me, actually being able to just kind of reflect on what it is, what they are, and what they actually mean to that individual and the home that you might be changing, because it's something that I've come across in practice that a lot of people don't really think about. That actually, what is an adaptation? What does it mean? Why are we doing it? And the impact that it can have. And we don't necessarily think about what comes afterwards, which is something we should be looking at. But I mean, the book was a labor of love, wasn't it, Ruth? Really, it was kind of. I mean, I'm very proud of that. Very proud of the whole book, and I'm pleased that actually I've had the opportunity to be involved with it.
So, it's a quick question from Charlotte. Does the book include technical info, like any relevant building regs, etc.?
We touch on building regulations, but it's kind of in passing because they're available. So we would mention obviously Part M, but if we're talking about windows, fire egress, then they're referenced. But part of the book, the idea of the book is so people will go off, they'll find a bit of information, and the link should be there to take them to that information, but then they get to identify that. Why repeat information that's already out there, I think, is the idea.
Okay, so that kind of links very nicely to Jane's question then. Is there a resource list within the book which...
There isn't a specific resource list, but as Ruth said, as you go through the book, and there are particular areas that come up, like things like building regulations, fire regulations, those kind of things, we do point you in that direction. So, I mean, what you will see is that there is an asterisk or a star next to anything that's on our online that you can access from the online section of the book. But we, like Ruth was saying, we didn't really want to repeat information that's already out there.
And if it's the ebook, then the link should be live to the information that we provided. or to kind of, I think there's a link to foundations in there.
Oh, excellent, excellent. So let me just put up the slide again, just with the code in case anybody wants it. So finally, what's next? What's your kind of plans for the next steps? Other than obviously signing lots of books, what's your what you moving on to next?
I'm writing another book. This, although I will admit I'm not actually writing the majority of the technical information on it. Using the same kind of format. And working with some very experienced practitioners. It's in the area of wheelchairs and kind of the skills that are needed to assess for and provide those. I am not writing anything that is directly linked to that. And then I've just started a job as a project for Allied Health Professionals Legacy Mentor, reflecting my great age, seeing what that role might look like in Lincolnshire. So stepping away from a little bit of housing, but not totally.
Great. Well, there are a couple of extra questions in the chat, so if you're happy to hang around and converse with people in the chat, that'd be fantastic. But thank you both for joining us this afternoon. It's been really interesting. And let's say if anybody scrolls up the chat, you'll see the discount code and the link for the book. So thank you both. Thank you both.